The man escaped the storm and found shelter in a cave. But a discovery changes everything. Marcus Thompson was running desperately along the muddy trail as the torrential rain lashed the Appalachian Mountains in Virginia. He had gone out for a morning hike when the weather changed drastically, turning that peaceful Sunday morning into a nightmare. That's when he spotted the dark entrance of a cave among the rocks. With no alternative, he forced his way into the rocky shelter, taking the soaked backpack off his shoulders. His eyes took a few moments to adjust to the darkness, but he soon realized he wasn't in a simple hollow. The cave extended into the mountain, forming a kind of natural tunnel. He turned on his phone's flashlight and began to explore the place when something caught his attention. Hidden behind a larger rock, there was a rusty metal box, partially buried in the rocky ground. Marcus felt his heart race. Who would leave something there in the middle of nowhere? With trembling hands, he opened the lid of the box. Inside, protected by plastic yellowed with time, were old photographs and some documents. But what shocked him the most was a birth certificate with his own name. Marcus Thompson Mitchell. The difference was stark. On all his official documents, he was Marcus Thompson Harrison, son of Robert and Margaret Harrison, born in Hot Springs. But that certificate said he was born in Saratoga Springs, a nearby town, and the parents listed were completely different people. The photographs showed a young woman with dark hair and gentle eyes, holding a baby in front of that same cave. On the back of one of the images, delicate handwriting recorded, "Our special place, where it all began, Elizabeth and Marcus, April 15th, 1984. Marcus quickly calculated. April 1984 was the month of his birth. Could that woman be his real mother? But how? Robert and Margaret Harrison had always told him he was their biological son. They never mentioned adoption or anything of the sort. The storm outside intensified, with lightning illuminating the dark sky and thunder echoing through the mountains. Marcus found himself forced to spend the night in the cave, examining every detail of those documents in the flickering light of his phone, which was already low on battery. Among the papers, he found a letter written in a feminine hand. "My dear son, if someone finds this one day, know that you were deeply loved from the very first moment. I had to make the most difficult decision of my life, but it was out of love. Elizabeth." Those words left him deeply shaken. Who was Elizabeth? Why had she left him? And why had his adoptive parents never told the truth? All night long, Marcus lay awake, turning over every detail of his life, looking for signs that could explain that devastating discovery. When dawn broke, he carefully stored all the documents in his backpack and left the cave. The trail was slippery, but he managed to get down the mountain safely. During the entire journey back home to Hot Springs, his mind wouldn't stop working. How to confront Robert and Margaret with this discovery? Marcus arrived home around noon. Robert was in the backyard tending to the plants, while Margaret was preparing Sunday lunch in the kitchen. It was such a normal, familiar scene that for a moment he hesitated. Perhaps it was better to forget all that and continue living as he always had. But the truth weighed on his chest like a stone. He wouldn't be able to pretend nothing had happened. He took a deep breath and called them both for a talk in the living room. Robert and Margaret immediately realized something was wrong from their son's tense expression. "Dad, Mom, I need to show you something," said Marcus, taking the documents out of his backpack. When Margaret saw the photographs and the birth certificate, her face went completely pale. Robert stood motionless, as if he had been punched in the stomach. The silence stretched for several minutes until Margaret broke down in tears. "My God, how did you find this?" she managed to ask between sobs. "I was hiding from the rain in a cave yesterday. This was inside there. Now explain to me, who is Elizabeth? Why did you never tell me I was adopted?" Robert stood up and began pacing nervously around the room. Margaret cried louder and louder, repeating, "I'm sorry," several times. Marcus had never seen his parents in that state. It was as if an entire world of lies was crumbling at that moment. "Son, we can explain," Robert finally said. "But you need to understand that we did everything out of love. We were always afraid of losing you if you knew the truth." "What truth? Who are my real parents? Who is this Elizabeth?" Margaret dried her eyes with her shirt sleeve and took a deep breath. Elizabeth was your biological mother. A very young girl, she couldn't have been more than 18 when you were born. We found you in the cave when you were 2 years old. 2 years old? You found me abandoned? Not exactly abandoned, Robert intervened. There was a note with you asking whoever found you to take good care of you, and there was this hidden box with your documents. And you never looked for this, Elizabeth? You never tried to return the child to the mother? The awkward silence that followed was answer enough. Marcus realized his adoptive parents had made a selfish decision. They wanted a child, and simply took one they found. We were desperate, Margaret managed to say. We had lost our first baby just a few months before. When we found you in that cave, it was as if God had given us a second chance. But I had a mother. You stole someone's child. It wasn't like that, Robert reacted firmly. Elizabeth had been missing for weeks. Everyone in the area was looking for her. When we found you, there was no longer any hope she would show up. And how do you know that? Because we lived in Saratoga Springs at the time. We knew Elizabeth's story. She had problems with her husband. It was a very complicated situation. Marcus felt the world spinning around him. Not only had he discovered he was adopted, but also that his adoptive parents had hidden crucial information about his origin. The trust he had placed in them his entire life was being shattered at that moment. I need some time to process this, he said, getting up from the armchair. Son, please, don't leave the house like this. Let's talk. Let's clear everything up, Margaret begged. There's nothing to clear up. You lied to me for 37 years. You lied about who I am, about where I come from. How can I trust you now? Marcus went up to the bedroom, grabbed some clothes, and came back down. Robert and Margaret were hugging on the sofa, both crying. For a moment he felt sorry for them. After all, they had been dedicated parents all his life, but the disappointment was greater than the compassion at that instant. I'm going to be away for a few days. I need to think. Where are you going? Margaret asked desperately. To Saratoga Springs. I'm going to find out who Elizabeth was and what really happened. Marcus, please don't do this. Some things are better left in the past, Robert tried to dissuade him. For you, maybe. For me, no. I have the right to know who I am. Marcus took the car and drove to Saratoga Springs, a tourist town known for its mineral waters and mild climate. During the drive, his mind buzzed with questions. What was Elizabeth like? Why had she left him in the cave? Could she still be alive? Arriving in town, he looked for a simple hotel downtown and settled in. His first stop would be the civil registry office to try and discover more information about his original birth certificate. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It's a huge help for us who are just starting out. Now continuing. At the registry office, a friendly clerk assisted him. Marcus explained he was seeking information about his birth record and showed the certificate he had found. The woman examined the document carefully. This record is from 1984. I'll need to check the physical archives because from that era, we don't have everything digitized yet. Can you come back tomorrow? Marcus nodded and left the registry office frustrated. He would have to wait another day to discover anything concrete. He decided to walk through the town, observing the people and trying to imagine what Elizabeth might have been like. Did anyone still remember her? He passed by the main church, an old and imposing building in the town center. The priest was leaving after the afternoon mass, and Marcus decided to approach him. Perhaps a man of the church might have information about old families in the area. Father, my name is Marcus. I'm looking for information about a person who lived here about 40 years ago. Her name was Elizabeth. The priest, a man with white hair and a kind gaze, thought for a few moments. Elizabeth, did she have a last name? I don't know. That's all the information I have, said Marcus, showing one of the photographs. The priest examined the image carefully, bringing it close to his eyes. Suddenly his expression changed. My God, this is Elizabeth Thompson Mitchell, but how do you have this photo? Marcus's heart raced. You knew her? Knew her? Of course I knew her. It was one of the saddest stories I witnessed in my 60 years as a priest. Elizabeth was a very young girl, married to a violent man. She disappeared one night and was never found again. Violent how? The priest looked around, as if making sure no one was listening. "Come, let's talk in the church office. This is a very painful story." They entered the sacristy, a small and cozy room with walls covered in sacred images. The priest served some coffee and began to tell. Elizabeth was the daughter of a humble family from here. She married very young to a much older man, Gerald, but he was very jealous and aggressive. Several times Elizabeth came here to the church with a bruised face, asking for help. And no one did anything? Son, this was 40 years ago. Things were different. We tried to talk to Gerald, to counsel Elizabeth, but she was afraid to leave. She said he threatened to do something worse if she left him. And what happened to her? One night she simply vanished. Gerald said she had run off with another man, but we never believed that. Elizabeth wasn't that kind of person. She was a sweet, religious girl, very dedicated to her family. Marcus felt a tightness in his chest. His biological mother had lived in an environment of violence and fear. Suddenly, the decision to leave him in the cave began to make sense. Perhaps she was trying to protect him. Father, was Elizabeth pregnant when she disappeared? The priest fell silent for a moment, as if reliving painful memories. Yes, she was. About 7 months pregnant. We were very worried because she disappeared so close to her due date. And they never heard from her again? Never. Gerald moved away from town a few months later. Said he couldn't live here anymore with the memories of her. Is this Gerald still alive? To my knowledge, yes, he should be living in White Sulphur Springs. That was the last information I had. But why these questions? Did you know Elizabeth? Marcus took a deep breath. The time had come to tell the truth. Father, I think I am Elizabeth's son. The priest nearly dropped his coffee cup. His eyes widened, and he was speechless for a few seconds. What do you mean? You're Elena's baby? I believe so. I found these documents in a cave and they indicate Elena was my mother. Good heavens, the priest exclaimed, making the sign of the cross. So you survived. Elena managed to save her son. What do you mean, Father? Son, when Elena disappeared, we imagined the worst. We thought Joachim had done something terrible to her and the baby. We never imagined she had managed to escape and save the child. Do you think she died? The priest paused for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. Son, I'll be honest with you. Elena was in a very dangerous situation. Joachim discovered she was planning to run away and was furious. The last time we spoke, she told me she was afraid he would harm the baby. And she never mentioned anything about hiding the child in a cave. Not directly, but she always talked about a special place in the mountains where she would go to pray when she was very distressed. She said it was a place where she felt protected by God. Marcus realized he was discovering important pieces of the puzzle of his origin. Elena hadn't just abandoned a child. She had made a desperate plan to save her son from a violent father. Father, did Elena have family here, siblings, parents? Her parents died when she was still a teenager, but she had an older sister, Carol. She still lives here in town. Marcus's heart raced again. He had an aunt, a person who knew Eleanor personally and could give him more information about his birth mother. Do you know where I can find this Carol? She lives on Flower Street, number 42. It's a yellow house with a green gate. But son, take it easy. The discovery that you're alive could be a huge shock for her. Marcus thanked the priest and left the church with his heart pounding. He finally had a concrete lead about his biological family, but at the same time, he was apprehensive about what meeting Carol would be like. Flower Street was in a quiet neighborhood of the town with simple, well-kept houses. Marcus easily found number 42, a yellow house with a green gate, exactly as the priest had described. He took a few deep breaths before knocking on the door. A woman of about 60 answered, with graying hair in a bun and kind eyes very similar to Elena's in the photographs. Good afternoon. Are you Carol Thompson Mitchell? Yes, I am. How can I help you? My name is Marcus. I would like to talk to you about your sister, Elizabeth. Carol's expression changed completely. She turned pale and leaned against the doorframe. Elizabeth? Why do you want to know about Elizabeth? Ma'am, may I come in? It's a long and very important conversation. Carol hesitated for a few seconds, but finally opened the door. The living room was simple and cozy, with old furniture and many plants. On the walls, several family photographs, including some of a young Elizabeth. "Have a seat," said Carol, still clearly shaken. "It's been 40 years since anyone has come to me to talk about Elizabeth. Mrs. Carroll, I'll be direct. I believe I am your sister's son." Carol was in a state of shock for a few seconds, staring at Marcus. Suddenly she began to cry convulsively. "My God, it's true, you have her eyes, and the shape of your face. You look just like Elizabeth when she was young. Do you remember when she was pregnant?" How could I forget? It was the most difficult period of her life. Gerald was becoming increasingly violent and she lived in fear. Several times she came here to my house, all bruised, asking for help. And what did you do? What could we do? Back then, there was nothing to protect women from domestic violence. The police didn't get involved in husband and wife fights. We could only comfort her and ask her to be patient. Marcus felt anger imagining his biological mother going through so much suffering. At the same time, he was impressed by the courage she had shown in planning her escape. "Mrs. Carroll, did Elizabeth ever say anything about leaving the baby somewhere safe?" Carol stopped crying and looked at him carefully. "Yes, she did. In the last weeks before she disappeared, she was acting very strange. She would say things like, 'I'm going to make sure my son has a better life than mine,' and, 'Sometimes a mother has to make sacrifices no one understands.' And she never mentioned a cave in the mountains. The cave, of course. Elizabeth always went to that cave when she was very distressed. She said it was the only place where she could think clearly. You were found there." "I was. By a couple who raised me as their biological son." "So Elizabeth succeeded. She managed to save you from Gerald." Marcus realized Carol was emotional, not only from the discovery that he was alive, but also from understanding that Elizabeth had managed to carry out her protection plan. "Mrs. Carol, what happened to Elizabeth after she left me in the cave?" Carol's expression saddened again. "Marcus, that's the most painful part of the story. Elizabeth was never seen again after that night. A few days after her disappearance, they found her clothes by the riverbank. Gerald said she must have thrown herself into the water out of despair." "And you all believed that?" "I never believed it. Elizabeth was very religious. She would never do such a thing. But Gerald was very convincing and had influence in town. The official story became that she had taken her own life. What if she had only faked her own passing to be able to flee town?" Carol looked at Marcus with a hopeful expression that hadn't appeared on her face in decades. "Do you think Elizabeth could be alive?" "I don't know, but I need to find out. Do you have anything that belonged to her? Any clue that could help me?" Carol stood up and went to an old wardrobe in the corner of the room. From inside, she pulled out a shoebox full of keepsakes. "I kept everything that was left of Elizabeth's things. Gerald burned most of it, but I managed to save some." Inside the box were letters, more photographs, and some personal items. Marcus examined each item carefully, looking for any clue that might indicate where Elizabeth had fled. One letter in particular caught his attention. It was addressed to Elizabeth, but the sender was from Hot Springs, exactly the town where he had been raised. "Mrs. Carroll, who is this person who wrote to Elizabeth from Hot Springs?" Carol examined the letter and her eyes lit up. "Oh, that's from Patricia. She was Elizabeth's best friend in their youth. They corresponded often, even after Elizabeth married." "Does Patricia still live in Hot Springs?" "As far as I know, yes, but it's been years since I've had contact with her." Marcus felt he was on the right track. Patricia might have important information about Elizabeth's last moments in town. Maybe she even knew if Elizabeth had managed to escape. "Would you mind if I took this letter? I can return it later." "Of course you can take it. Take anything you think might help. I just want to know the truth about what happened to my sister." Marcus spent another hour talking with Carol, hearing stories about Elizabeth and her personality. He discovered that his biological mother was a very sensitive, generous, and courageous person. She also loved to read and dreamed of studying nursing. When he said goodbye to Carol, he promised to stay in touch and share any discovery about Elizabeth. The woman was visibly emotional, knowing her nephew was alive and well. Back at the hotel, Marcus spent the night analyzing the letters exchanged between Elizabeth and Patricia. The last letters were from 1984, exactly the year of his birth. In one of them, Elizabeth mentioned she was making plans to ensure the baby's safety. The next morning, He returned to the records office to get information about his birth certificate. The clerk had found the original record and had news. "Mr. Marcus, I found your record and something interesting. The certificate was issued by a local midwife, Mrs. Dorothy. She used to attend home births back then. Is this Mrs. Dorothy still alive?" "No, she passed away about 10 years ago. But she left a daughter, Helen, who is also a midwife. Maybe she knows something." Marcus wrote down Helen's address and went to look for her immediately. Helen lived in a simple house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a well-kept garden. When Marcus explained the reason for his visit, Helen became visibly nervous. "I don't know anything about old births. My mother never told me the details of her work." "Please, Miss Helen, I'm just trying to understand how I was born. I found documents suggesting your mother helped deliver me." Helen looked around as if checking if anyone could be listening. "Look, my mother told me a strange story once, about a birth she attended in a cave during a storm, but she made me promise I would never tell anyone." Marcus's heart almost stopped. "A cave? During a storm?" "Yes. She said she was called in the middle of the night by a very young girl who was in labor. The girl was hiding in a cave in the mountains." "And what happened after the birth?" Helen hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. "My mother said the girl asked for a very strange favor. She wanted her to take the baby to a specific couple in Hot Springs." "What couple?" "A couple who had recently lost a child. The girl said she had researched and specifically chosen them to raise the baby." Marcus was shocked. Elizabeth hadn't abandoned a child randomly. She had carefully planned where and with whom to leave her son. "And your mother did it?" "She did. She said she had never seen a mother so desperate to protect her child. The girl was crying a lot, but said it was the only way to ensure the baby had a safe life." "And what happened to the mother afterward?" "My mother never saw her again, but a few days later she learned that her clothes had been found in the river. Everyone thought she had, you know." "But did your mother believe that?" Helen shook her head. "No. She always said that girl was too strong to do something like that. She thought she had faked it all to be able to escape." Marcus left Helen's house with a completely new understanding of his origin. Elizabeth hadn't been an irresponsible mother who abandoned a child. She had been a courageous woman who sacrificed everything to protect her baby from a violent father. Now he needed to find out if Elizabeth had really managed to escape and start a new life somewhere. The most promising lead was Patricia, Elizabeth's friend who lived in Hot Springs. Marcus decided to return to Hot Springs that same afternoon, but first he wanted to visit the cave one more time. He felt he needed to be in the place where he was born to process all that information. He climbed the mountain trail under the afternoon sun. The cave was exactly as he had found it days before, but now it had a completely different meaning. It wasn't just a shelter from the storm. It was the place where his life had begun, where a young mother had made the most difficult decision of her life. He sat at the entrance of the cave and imagined Elizabeth there, alone, in labor, terrified, but determined to protect her child. That woman's courage impressed him deeply. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, back in Hot Springs, Marcus decided to look for Patricia before returning home. He used the address from the old letter and went to the indicated neighborhood. The street had changed a lot in 40 years, but he found a house that could be the right one. A woman of about 60 was watering plants in the garden. Marcus approached hesitantly. "Sorry to bother you. Are you Patricia?" "Yes, I am. What do you want?" "My name is Marcus. I'd like to talk to you about a friend of yours from your youth, Elizabeth Thompson Mitchell." Patricia's face completely transformed. She dropped the hose on the ground and stared fixedly at Marcus. "Elizabeth? How do you know Elizabeth?" "Mrs. Patricia, it's a long story. May I come in so we can talk?" Patricia led him inside the house, visibly shaken. The living room was comfortable, decorated with antique objects and many plants. "It's been decades since anyone has spoken to me about Elizabeth," she said, serving some coffee. "Where did you meet her?" "Mrs. Patricia, I believe I am Elizabeth's son." Patricia fell silent for several seconds, carefully studying Marcus's face. "My God, you're the baby. You're the child she was expecting." "You knew about the pregnancy?" "I did. Elizabeth used to write to me telling me everything. She was desperate about the marriage situation and very worried about the baby." "And did she ever mention any escape plans?" Patricia looked around, as if still afraid of being overheard. "Elizabeth wrote me a strange letter a few days before she disappeared. She said she was planning something that would guarantee her son's safety, even if it cost her dearly." "Do you still have that letter?" "I do. I kept all of Elizabeth's letters. I always hoped that one day she would come back for them." Patricia went to an old piece of furniture and brought out a box full of correspondence. She searched through them until she found the specific letter. "Here it is. Read it yourself." Marcus took the letter with trembling hands. It was Elizabeth's handwriting, the same he had seen in the cave documents. "Dear Patricia," the letter said, "I am writing to say goodbye. Gerald found out I'm planning to run away, and the situation has become very dangerous. I can't wait any longer. I'm going to do what I plan to protect my baby, even knowing I may never see him again. If something happens to me, I want you to know it was all for love. One day, God willing, my son will understand that I did the best I could. I love you very much, Elizabeth." And that was the last letter she sent? It was. A few days later, I heard on the radio that her clothes had been found by the river. Everyone thought she had jumped in. "But you believed that?" Patricia shook her head emphatically. "Never! Elizabeth was very religious and very strong. She would never do such a thing. I always thought she had faked it all to be able to disappear." "And you never tried to investigate?" "I did. In the first few years, whenever I went to Saratoga Springs, I asked about her. But I never found out anything. Over time, I ended up giving up." "Patricia, I need to know, did Elizabeth ever mention any specific place where she would like to live if she managed to escape?" Patricia thought for a few moments. "She always talked about the coast. She said she dreamed of living in a small beach town where no one knew her, and she could start her life over." "Coast of which state?" "South Carolina or Florida. She had a distant cousin who lived in Myrtle Beach, if I'm not mistaken." Marcus felt he was getting closer and closer to the truth. Elizabeth may have really managed to escape and start a new life on the South Carolina coast. "Do you remember the name of that cousin?" "I think it was Dorothy or Sandra. A name like that." "And you never tried to contact this cousin?" "I tried once, but I couldn't locate her. And I was also afraid that if Elizabeth was really alive and in hiding, my search could put her in danger." Marcus understood Patricia's concern. If Elizabeth had faked her passing to escape a violent husband, any search for her could expose her new identity and put her at risk. "Patricia, do you think Elizabeth would want to know that her son is well and looking for her?" "I'm sure she would. She loved you even before you were born. She always talked about the plans she had for when you grew up." "What plans?" "She wanted to teach you to read. She wanted you to study, to have a profession. She said she would do everything so that you had the opportunities she never had." Marcus was moved imagining Elizabeth dreaming of his future while living in an environment of violence and fear. "Patricia, if I try to look for Elizabeth, would you help me? Of course, it's what I want most in life, to find my best friend and know that she's okay." Marcus spent the rest of the afternoon with Patricia, listening to stories about Elizabeth and her personality. He discovered that his biological mother was a very intelligent person who liked to write poetry and dreamed of being a teacher. When he said goodbye to Patricia, he promised to stay in touch and share any discovery about Elizabeth. Now he had several promising leads: the cousin who lived in Myrtle Beach and the fact that Elizabeth always dreamed of living by the coast. But before starting a wider search, Marcus knew he needed to resolve the situation with his adoptive parents. The discovery about his origin had created a family crisis that needed to be resolved. He arrived home in the late afternoon. Robert and Margaret were in the living room, visibly anxious for news. When Marcus entered, they both stood up immediately. "Son, thank God you're back," said Margaret, her eyes red from crying. "How were these days?" "Did you find out anything?" Robert asked hesitantly. Marcus sat on the sofa and took a deep breath. It was time to tell everything he had discovered, and try to rebuild the family trust. Dad, Mom, I found out a lot, and I need you to be completely honest with me now. You can ask anything, Robert said. Did you know Elizabeth personally? Margaret and Robert exchanged nervous glances. It was clear they knew more than they had initially told. Yes, we did, Margaret finally admitted. Elizabeth was known in the area. Everyone knew about the difficult situation she lived in with her husband. And did you know she was pregnant when she left me in the cave? We knew. In fact, son, we need to tell you the complete truth, Robert said, seeming to have made a decision. What truth? Margaret began to cry again. The midwife who helped Elizabeth with the birth was our neighbor's mother. She was the one who told us about you. How so? Elizabeth had specifically asked the midwife to look for a couple who had recently lost a child. The midwife knew about our situation and came to us. Marcus was shocked. His adoptive parents hadn't found an abandoned child by chance. They had been specifically chosen by Elizabeth to raise her son. So you knew from the beginning who my biological mother was and why she left me in the cave. We knew, Robert confirmed, but the midwife made us promise we would never tell anything. She said Elizabeth was in danger and that any information about her could put her at risk. And you never questioned that? Never wanted to know if Elizabeth was okay? Of course we did, Margaret exclaimed. But the midwife was very clear. To protect Elizabeth and protect you, we had to pretend you were our biological son. And when Elizabeth officially disappeared, didn't you find it strange? Actually, we thought she had managed to escape as planned, Robert revealed. The midwife told us Elizabeth was preparing an escape and that leaving you in the cave was part of the plan. Marcus felt a mix of anger and understanding. His adoptive parents had lied to him, but apparently for noble reasons of protection. Why did you never tell me any of this when I grew up? Because we were afraid, Margaret said through tears. Afraid that you would want to look for Elizabeth and end up discovering where she was. If she had truly managed to hide from her ex-husband, our search could destroy her new life. And we were also afraid of losing you, Robert added. For you had been our son for so many years that we couldn't imagine life without you. Marcus realized the situation was far more complex than he had initially imagined. His parents hadn't acted out of selfishness, but from a mixture of love and fear. What if I decide to look for Elizabeth now? Son, you're an adult and have the right to make your own decisions, Robert said. We just ask that you be careful. If Elizabeth is truly alive and hidden, any wrong move could put her in danger. Could her ex-husband still pose a threat? We don't know. Gerald must be over 80 now, if he's even still alive. But back then, he had dangerous connections and a lot of power in the region. Marcus understood that searching for Elizabeth would be more complicated than he had imagined. It wasn't just about finding a person, but about doing so without putting anyone at risk. Dad, Mom, I understand your motivations, and I recognize that you were wonderful parents to me. But I need time to process all of this and decide what to do. We understand perfectly, Margaret said. We just want you to know that regardless of what you discover about Elizabeth, you will always be our son, and our love for you will never change. That night, Marcus lay awake thinking about all the revelations of the past few days. His life had completely transformed. He had discovered he had a brave biological mother who sacrificed everything to protect him, an aunt who missed him, a family friend who held precious memories, and adoptive parents who had lied out of love. In the following days, Marcus tried to return to his normal routine. He worked at an accounting firm in downtown Hot Springs and tried to focus on his professional duties. But it was impossible not to constantly think about Elizabeth and the possibility that she was alive somewhere. During lunch, he decided to do some internet searches for people named Elizabeth Thompson Mitchell. He found several people with that name, but none that matched the age and characteristics of his biological mother. He also tried searching for Gerald, the violent ex-husband. He discovered that Gerald had passed away 3 years prior in White Sulphur Springs, exactly where the priest had mentioned he was living. The news brought relief, as it meant Elizabeth no longer needed to hide from him. This changed everything. If Elizabeth was alive and hidden somewhere, She was now free from the threat that had forced her to flee. Theoretically, she could resume her normal life without fear. Marcus decided he needed to try to find Elizabeth, but in a careful and respectful way. If she had built a new life, he didn't want to destroy it with an inappropriate search. His first stop would be Myrtle Beach, where Elizabeth's cousin had lived. Even if it was an old lead, it was the only concrete starting point he had. That weekend, Marcus took his car and drove to Myrtle Beach. The trip from Hot Springs to the South Carolina coast took about 5 hours, through mountain roads and beautiful scenery. Myrtle Beach was a charming beach town, with lovely beaches and a preserved historic center. Marcus settled into a simple inn and began his search for Elizabeth's cousin. Without the cousin's full last name, the search would be difficult. Marcus decided to start at the city's registry offices, looking for old records of people with names similar to Dorothy or Sandra. At the downtown registry office, he explained his situation to the clerk, omitting some details as a precaution. "I'm looking for a person who might have relatives here in town. Her name would be Dorothy or Sandra Thompson Mitchell." The clerk consulted the records and found a few possibilities. There was a Dorothy Thompson Mitchell who had gotten married in the city in 1978, and a Sandra Mitchell who had registered the birth of a daughter in 1981. "Do these people still live in town?" Marcus asked. "Dorothy, yes. She lives in the Surfside Beach neighborhood. Sandra, I don't know. It's been a while since I've seen any activity on her record." Marcus noted Dorothy's address and headed to the Surfside Beach neighborhood. It was a more remote area from the center, with simple houses and quiet streets. He found the indicated house, a small but well-kept building, painted light blue. He knocked on the door, and a woman of about 70 answered. "Good afternoon, ma'am." "Are you Dorothy Thompson Mitchell?" "Yes, I am. What can I do for you?" "My name is Marcus. I'm looking for information about a relative of yours, Elizabeth Thompson Mitchell." Dorothy's face lit up immediately. "Elizabeth? My little cousin Elizabeth. It's been so many years since I've had any news of her." Marcus's heart raced. This was the right person. "Would you mind talking with me about Elizabeth? It's very important." "Of course. Come in, come in." It's been decades since I've talked about Elizabeth with anyone. Dorothy's living room was simple and cozy, with old furniture and many family photographs. Marcus sat on the sofa and took a deep breath before starting the conversation. "Dorothy, I need to tell you something that might be a shock. I believe I am Elizabeth's son." Dorothy was silent for a few seconds, studying Marcus's face carefully. "Good heavens! You're the baby Elizabeth was expecting when she disappeared. You knew about her pregnancy?" "I did. Elizabeth wrote to me telling me about the difficult marriage and about the pregnancy. She was very worried about the situation." "And did she ever come here to Myrtle Beach?" Dorothy hesitated, as if deciding how much she could tell. "Marcus, can I trust you? I need to know your intentions are good." "Dorothy, I just want to know if my mother is okay. If she is alive and happy, I don't want to disrupt her life. I just want to know that she managed to save herself." Dorothy studied him for a few more seconds and then made a decision. "Elizabeth did come here, in 1984, a few months after you were born." Marcus felt the world spin around him. "Is she here? Is Elizabeth alive?" "Easy. Let me tell the whole story. Elizabeth arrived here in a terrible state. She was very thin, traumatized, afraid of everything and everyone. She said she had faked her own death to escape her violent husband." "And what happened to her?" "She stayed here at my house for a few weeks recovering, but she was very depressed. She cried all the time, talking about the son she had left behind." "Did she want to look for me?" "She did, but she was afraid. She said that if Gerald found out she was alive, he might harm the baby to get revenge on her." "And then?" "She decided to leave. She said she was going to try to rebuild her life somewhere else, but that she would never forget her son." "Where did she go?" Dorothy sighed deeply. "Marcus, Elizabeth moved to Charleston. She got a job at a canning factory and rented a small room. She changed her name to Elizabeth Mitchell and created a new identity." "And did you keep in touch?" "For a few years, yes. She would write to me from time to time, telling me how she was. But she always asked me not to reveal where she was to anyone. And then, about 15 years ago, the letters stopped coming. I never heard from her again. Marcus felt a mixture of hope and worry. Elizabeth had managed to escape and start a new life, but she had lost contact with the family 15 years ago. Dorothy, do you still have her address in Charleston? I have the last address she gave me, but I don't know if she still lives there. Dorothy went to fetch an old address book and found Elizabeth's information. It was a street in downtown Charleston, in an area Marcus didn't know. Marcus, if you go looking for her, be very careful. Elizabeth was very traumatized when she was here. If she really managed to build a new life, your appearance could be a huge shock. I understand. I'll be very careful. And another thing, Elizabeth may have remarried. She may have other children. You need to be prepared for any situation. Marcus nodded, although the possibility of Elizabeth having a new family made him apprehensive. It would be complicated to explain his existence to any possible new children of hers. He said goodbye to Dorothy with a promise to keep in touch and set off for Charleston. The trip was short, but he used the time in the car to think about how to approach Elizabeth if he managed to find her. Charleston was a large, bustling city, very different from the smaller towns where he had been born and raised. The address Dorothy had given him was in a central area near the port. Marcus found the street and the number indicated. It was an old 3-story building with small apartments. He looked on the intercom for any name that could be Elizabeth or Elizabeth Mitchell. He didn't find anything obvious, but there were some names with just initials. He decided to ring an apartment that was listed only as E. Mitchell. "Who is it?" a woman's voice answered through the intercom. Marcus felt his heart race. That voice sounded familiar to him, though he couldn't be sure. "Good afternoon, I'm looking for Mrs. Elizabeth Mitchell." "That's me, what do you want?" "Mrs. Elizabeth, my name is Marcus. I'd like to speak with you about a personal matter. It's very important." There was a long pause before the answer. "About what exactly?" Marcus hesitated. How to explain the situation over the intercom? "It's about your family from Saratoga Springs, about Elizabeth Thompson Mitchell." Another long silence. Marcus could hear his own breathing and his heartbeat. "Come up. Apartment 23. The building door opened, and Marcus climbed the stairs with trembling legs. He was about to meet his biological mother after 37 years. The door to apartment 23 was slightly ajar. Marcus knocked lightly and heard the voice say, "Come in." He pushed the door open and entered a small but cozy apartment. And there she was, Elizabeth, his biological mother. She was a woman of about 60, with graying hair tied in a simple bun. Her eyes were exactly the same as in the old photographs, though now marked by time and experience. She watched him with an expression of astonishment and disbelief. "My God," she whispered, "you are my son." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Elizabeth had recognized him immediately. Marcus stood for a few seconds unable to speak. Seeing Elizabeth there, alive and real, was overwhelming. All the emotions he had held during weeks of searching came to the surface at once. "Elizabeth," he finally managed to say. "Mother?" Elizabeth began to cry and approached him hesitantly. It was as if she was seeing a ghost, something she had dreamed of so many times but never believed could be real. "How did you find me? How did you know I was alive?" "It's a long story," Marcus said, also emotional. "May I sit down?" Elizabeth nodded, and they settled onto the small living room sofa. For a few minutes they just looked at each other, trying to process the reality of this meeting. "Are you okay?" Elizabeth finally asked. "Did you grow up in a good family?" "I did. Robert and Margaret Harrison raised me as their own biological son. They were wonderful parents." Elizabeth sighed with relief. "Thank God. I researched so much to choose them. I prayed so hard that they would give you everything I couldn't." "Why did you leave me in the cave, Elizabeth? Why didn't you look for another solution?" Elizabeth dried her eyes with a handkerchief and took a deep breath before answering. "Marcus, you have no idea what I was going through. Gerald found out I was planning to run away and he was furious. He threatened to hurt the baby if I tried to leave the house. And you believed he would do that? I did. Gerald was capable of anything when he was angry, and I couldn't risk your life. Elizabeth detailed how she had planned the escape, including giving birth in the cave with the help of a midwife and the careful selection of the adoptive parents. It was the hardest decision of my life, she said, but I knew it was the only way to make sure you had a chance to be happy. And after? How did you manage to fake your own death? I left my clothes by the riverbank and hid for a few days in an abandoned house. When the search was over, I managed to leave town hidden in a moving truck. And you came straight here? No. First I went to Dorothy's house in Myrtle Beach. I stayed there a few weeks, recovering physically and emotionally. Then I came to Charleston and started a new life. How did you get documents with a different name? Elizabeth hesitated before answering. Marcus. In the 80s, things were different. With a little money and some contacts, it was possible to get new documents without too many questions. And you never thought of coming back? Never wanted to look for me? Every single day, Elizabeth said, beginning to cry again. But I was afraid. Afraid that Gerald was still looking for me. Afraid of disrupting your life. Afraid that you would reject me. Elizabeth, Gerald died 3 years ago. You don't have to hide anymore. Elizabeth was shocked. He died? How do you know? I researched him. He died in White Sulphur Springs, where he was living. For a few minutes, Elizabeth was silent, processing the information. So I'm free, she said finally. After 40 years, I am truly free. And now? What do you want to do? I want to know my son, Elizabeth said without hesitation. I want to know everything about your life, about who you've become, about your dreams. Marcus spent the rest of the afternoon telling Elizabeth about his life, his happy childhood with Robert and Margaret, his studies, his work, his relationships. Elizabeth listened with absolute attention, as if trying to make up for all the lost years. Are you married? Do you have children? She asked. Not yet. I just got out of a long relationship, but I don't have children. And your work? Do you like what you do? I'm an accountant. It's not my passion, but it pays the bills. I always wanted to be a teacher, but I ended up following a safer path. A teacher of what? History. I've always liked understanding how things happened in the past. Elizabeth smiled. I liked history too when I was young, and I loved to read. They discovered several similarities in personality and tastes. Elizabeth was also an introverted and thoughtful person who liked to read and had an interest in history. And you, Elizabeth, how has your life been here? Simple and quiet. I worked for many years in a canning factory. I retired 2 years ago. I have a few friendly neighbors, but I never built very deep relationships. You never married again? No. I had a few relationships, but I could never completely trust anyone. The trauma of what I lived through with Gerald marked me deeply. And children? Did you never want to have other children? Elizabeth shook her head sadly. How could I? I already had a son I had abandoned. I didn't feel I had the right to have others until I knew you were okay. Marcus realized the weight Elizabeth had carried all those years. Guilt and longing had prevented her from completely rebuilding her life. Elizabeth, you didn't abandon a child. You saved a child. There's a huge difference. I know that rationally, but emotionally, it's hard. When it was time for Marcus to leave, they arranged to meet again the next day. Elizabeth wanted to show him the letters she had written to him over all those years, but never sent. I wrote hundreds of letters to you, she explained. Birthdays, Christmas, graduations I imagined. I kept them all. Marcus left Elizabeth's apartment deeply moved. The meeting had surpassed all his expectations. Elizabeth wasn't just a woman who had given birth. She was a mother who had suffered and sacrificed out of love for her son. The next morning, he returned to Elizabeth's apartment carrying a photo album of his life. He wanted to show her all the important moments she had missed. Elizabeth was visibly emotional seeing pictures of Marcus as a baby, child, teenager, and adult. She commented on each image as if it were a treasure. Look what a beautiful child you were, she said. And here at graduation, how I wish I could have been there. Elizabeth, would you like to meet Robert and Margaret? They are the people who raised me. Elizabeth hesitated. Do they know you found me? They know I was looking, but I haven't told them I found you yet. Do you think they will accept me? I'm sure. They always knew you existed and always respected your decision. Elizabeth agreed to meet Marcus's adoptive parents. She was nervous but also curious to meet the people who had given her son the love she couldn't provide. They drove back together to Hot Springs. During the trip, Elizabeth was visibly anxious. 40 years of separation had created a huge gap, and she didn't know how she would be received. When they arrived at Robert and Margaret's house, Marcus asked Elizabeth to wait in the car while he first spoke with his adoptive parents. Dad, Mum, I found Elizabeth. She's here in the car. Margaret put her hand to her heart, and Robert turned pale. She's alive, thank God, Margaret exclaimed. She wants to meet you. She wants to thank you for taking care of me. Of course. Tell her to come in, Robert said immediately. Elizabeth entered the house hesitantly. When she saw Margaret and Robert, she began to cry. Thank you so much, was all she could say at first. Margaret approached and hugged her tenderly. Thank you for giving us the most wonderful gift of our lives. Robert was also moved. Elizabeth, you created a wonderful son. Marcus is a credit to any mother. All afternoon they talked about Marcus, sharing memories and stories. Elizabeth was fascinated to learn details about her son's childhood and adolescence. You did exactly what I hoped for, Elizabeth said. You gave him love, education, values. He became a good man. Elizabeth, you are his mother too, Margaret said generously. We can share that love. Marcus is big enough to have two mothers. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. In the following days, Elizabeth stayed at Robert and Margaret's house, getting to know the family and Marcus's life better. It was as if she were filling 40 years of gap in just a few days. Marcus took Elizabeth to see Hot Springs, showed her the school he attended, his first job, the places he used to go. Elizabeth absorbed every detail, as if she were assembling a giant puzzle about her son's life. I want to know everything about you, she would say. I want to make up for all the lost time. Elizabeth, it's not about making up for it. It's about building a new relationship from now on. During one of their conversations, Elizabeth asked about Marcus's future plans. You said you always wanted to be a teacher. Why don't you go back to school? Because I have bills to pay. I can't afford to go back to school at my age. What if I helped you financially? I have some savings put away. I never spent much because I never had a reason to. Marcus was moved by the offer but hesitated to accept. Elizabeth, you don't have to do this. I want to. I always dreamed of being able to give my son an education. If I can do that now, even if it's late, it's a way to fulfill my dream of being a mother. After much reflection, Marcus accepted Elizabeth's help to take a teaching degree in history. It would be a way to fulfill an old dream and also to strengthen his relationship with her. Elizabeth decided to move to Hot Springs to be closer to her son and his adoptive parents. She rented a small apartment downtown and began to build a new life. Now that Gerald is dead, I can go back to using my real name, she said. I want to be Elizabeth Thompson Mitchell again. The process of changing her identity was complicated, but with the help of a lawyer, Elizabeth managed to legally reclaim her original identity. She also wanted to visit Carol, the sister she had left behind in Saratoga Springs. The reunion of the two sisters was extremely emotional. Elizabeth, I always knew you were alive, Carol shouted upon seeing her. I'm sorry for disappearing without an explanation, but I had no choice. You don't need to explain. The important thing is that you're back, and you brought our Marcus with you. Elizabeth's family gradually reunited. Patricia, her childhood friend, also came to visit and cried a lot upon seeing Elizabeth again after 40 years. You can't imagine how much I prayed that you were alive and well, Patricia said. Your prayers worked. I managed to survive and rebuild my life. Marcus watched these reunions with deep emotion. He was seeing Elizabeth gradually reclaim her identity and her original family. At the same time, he began his teaching degree in history. It was difficult to balance with work, but Elizabeth constantly supported him. "You were born to be a teacher," she would say. "I see it in the way you explain things, in the patience you have with people." During the course, Marcus developed a special interest in local history. He began researching the Appalachian Mountains region and discovered several fascinating stories about old families. "Why don't you write a book about our story?" Elizabeth suggested, "about how a mountain storm can completely change a person's life." The idea intrigued Marcus. He began writing an account of his journey of discovery, from the day he took refuge in the cave to the reunion with Elizabeth. "I want other people to know that sometimes the hardest decisions are made out of love," he explained, "and that it's never too late to find our family." Elizabeth actively participated in writing the book, providing details from her perspective of the events and helping to reconstruct important moments. "It's important that people understand I didn't abandon a child," she said. "I protected a child the only way I knew how." The book was finished 2 years later and was published by a local publisher. Storm on the Mountain, a story of love and sacrifice, became a regional success. Marcus began giving talks about his story, especially for adoptive family support groups and women who are victims of domestic violence. "I want people to know that a mother's love can manifest in many different ways," he would say in his talks. "Sometimes, loving means letting go." Elizabeth also participated in the talks when she felt comfortable. She spoke about her experience as a woman who was a victim of violence and about how she had found the strength to start life over. "It's never too late to reclaim our identity," she used to say. "I spent 40 years in hiding, but when my son found me, I could go back to being who I always was." The cave where Marcus had taken shelter from the storm became a special place for the family. They would return there regularly for moments of reflection and gratitude. "This is where it all began," Elizabeth would always say whenever they visited the place. "Here where you were born, and here where our true story was revealed." The City Council of Saratoga Springs, interested in the story, placed a commemorative plaque at the cave entrance, briefly telling the story of Elizabeth and Marcus. This cave witnessed an extraordinary act of a mother's love. In 1984, Elizabeth Thompson Mitchell gave birth to her son in this place and made the most difficult decision of her life to protect him. 40 years later, a storm brought Marcus back to discover his origins. May this story inspire everyone about the transformative power of love and forgiveness. Marcus graduated with a degree in history at 40 and got a job as a teacher at a local school. It was exactly what he had always dreamed of doing. "I never thought it would be possible to achieve this dream at my age," he said to Elizabeth on graduation day. "Son, there's no age for achieving dreams. It took me 60 years to be able to use my real name again. It took you 40 to become a teacher. The important thing is not to give up." Elizabeth also found a new purpose in life. She started working as a volunteer at a support center for women who are victims of domestic violence. "I want to help other women find the courage I found," she explained. "I want them to know it's possible to start over, no matter how many years have passed." The relationship between Marcus, Elizabeth, Robert and Margaret developed harmoniously. There was no competition or jealousy between the two mothers. Each had her unique role in Marcus's life. "I gave him life," Elizabeth used to say. "Margaret and Robert gave him love, education, and structure. Together we form a complete family." During family holidays, everyone would gather at Robert and Margaret's house. It was moving to see Elizabeth helping Margaret in the kitchen or talking with Robert about raising Marcus. "I never imagined it would be possible to have such a large and close-knit family," Marcus would often comment. At one of these family gatherings, Elizabeth made an unexpected announcement. "Marcus, there's something I've kept all these years, and now I want to share it with you." She brought out an old box, similar to the one Marcus had found in the cave. "These are all the letters I wrote to you over 40 years. Birthdays, Christmases, imaginary graduations. I wrote hundreds of letters I never sent." Marcus opened the box and found stacks of letters organized by date. There were letters for every birthday, for graduations Elizabeth had imagined, for Christmases she spent alone thinking of her son. "My dear son," said one of the Christmas letters, "today you turn 10 in my imagination. I hope you are in a family that celebrates this date with joy. I prayed for you to get the gift you wanted most. One day when we meet, I want to know what it was." Marcus cried upon reading those words. Elizabeth had been a present mother even in absence, keeping every important date and imagining what her son's life would be like. "Elizabeth, these letters are the greatest treasure I have ever received," he said. "They are 40 years of a mother's love that I couldn't show in person. Now you know that not a single day has passed without me thinking of you." From that moment on, Marcus began to read one letter per day, following the chronology Elizabeth had created. It was as if he were reliving his life with the imagined presence of his biological mother. Some letters were especially touching. In the letter for his 18th birthday, Elizabeth wrote, "My son, today you become an adult. I hope you are a good, honest, and generous man. I hope you have studied hard and have plans for the future. If I could give you one piece of advice on this date, it would be, never be afraid to love and never give up on your dreams." In another letter, for his 30th, she wrote, "I wonder if you are married by now. Do I have daughters-in-law or grandchildren I don't know? I pray every day that you have found someone special to share your life with. You deserve to be loved, as I have always loved you, even from afar." These letters helped Marcus understand that Elizabeth had been a true mother all those years, even without physical contact. Her maternal love had manifested through longing, prayers, and the letters never sent. The story of Marcus and Elizabeth began to spread beyond Hot Springs. A national magazine published a story about them, and soon they began receiving letters from people with similar stories. "You inspired me to look for my biological family," wrote a 50-year-old woman. "Your story gave me the courage to forgive my mother who gave me up for adoption," wrote a 30-year-old man. Marcus and Elizabeth realized their story had the power to help other people deal with issues of abandonment, adoption, and family forgiveness. They began receiving invitations to tell their story in other states. They traveled together to several cities, speaking about unconditional love, maternal sacrifice, and the importance of forgiveness. "Our story proves that true love overcomes time and distance," Marcus would often say in his talks. "And that it's never too late to be a family," Elizabeth would add. During one of these trips, they met an elderly woman who had given a son up for adoption 50 years earlier and had never tried to look for him. "I'm afraid he will reject me," she confessed. "Fear is normal," Elizabeth replied. "But the regret of not trying is far worse than the fear of being rejected." Inspired by the conversation, the woman decided to search for her son. A few months later, she sent Elizabeth a letter saying she had managed to reunite with him and they were building a relationship. "You saved my life," the letter said. "If it weren't for your story, I would have died without knowing my son." This kind of feedback motivated Elizabeth and Marcus to continue sharing their experience. They realized they had a mission greater than simply rebuilding their own family. In the 5th year after the reunion, Elizabeth was experiencing a health problem. She had developed arthritis and had difficulty moving around. Marcus became her primary caregiver, repaying in some way all the years of maternal care he had missed. "Now it's my turn to take care of you," he would say, while helping her with daily activities. "Marcus, you don't have to do this. You have your own life to live. Elizabeth, you sacrificed your entire life for me. Taking care of you now is the most natural thing in the world." During this period of more intensive care, the bond between them deepened even further. Elizabeth got to experience what it was really like to be cared for by a child, and Marcus got to exercise the filial love he had always wanted to show. "You know what makes me happiest?" Elizabeth asked one day while Marcus was helping her take her medicine. "What?" "Knowing that I made the right decision 40 years ago. You've become exactly the man I dreamed you would be. Kind, responsible, loving. And you've become exactly the mother I always wanted to have. Courageous, self-sacrificing, loving." Margaret and Robert also helped care for Elizabeth. It was touching to see the three of them caring for her like a united family. "Elizabeth, you are our family now," Margaret would say. "Marcus is our son, so you are our co-mother." "Co-mother," Elizabeth repeated, smiling. "I like that word. Mothers together caring for the same son." Elizabeth's health stabilized with proper treatment, and she was able to return to her normal activities. But the period of intensive care had tightened the family bonds even further. Marcus had also changed during this time. Caring for Elizabeth had made him reflect on his own life plans. He realized he wanted to start a family of his own. "Elizabeth, I'm thinking of getting married," he announced one day. "To whom?" she asked excitedly. "Remember Jennifer, the teacher I work with? We've been dating for 2 years." "Of course I remember. She's a wonderful young woman. Are you two going to get married?" "I'm thinking about it, but I wanted your opinion first." Elizabeth was moved. "Marcus, you don't need my approval to be happy, but if you want to know my opinion, I think Jennifer is perfect for you." Marcus's wedding was an emotional event for the whole family. Elizabeth, Margaret, and Carol worked together on the arrangements, like 3 mothers caring for the same son. "I never imagined I'd have 3 mothers working on my wedding," Marcus joked. "You deserve it," Elizabeth replied. "You deserve all the love you missed for so many years." The ceremony was simple, but very moving. Elizabeth cried throughout the ceremony, remembering all the dreams she had had about her son's future. "Finally, I can see my son getting married," she said to Carol. "For 40 years, I dreamed of this moment." Jennifer adapted very well to Marcus's extended family. She loved hearing Elizabeth's stories and often asked for advice on how to handle Marcus. "Has he always been stubborn?" Jennifer would ask. "Always," Elizabeth laughed. "But it's a good stubbornness of a determined person." A year after the wedding, Jennifer became pregnant. Elizabeth was radiant with the news that she would be a grandmother. "I'm going to be a grandmother," she announced to the whole neighborhood. "I'm going to have a little grandson." During Jennifer's pregnancy, Elizabeth became extremely protective and helpful. She cooked for her, gave advice about the pregnancy, helped with baby shopping. "Elizabeth, you're more anxious than I am," Jennifer observed. "It's just that I want to savor every moment of this pregnancy. With Marcus, I couldn't fully experience it because of the situation I was going through." When the baby was born, a boy named Robert after his adoptive grandfather, Elizabeth was at the hospital bursting with emotion. "He looks just like Marcus when he was born," she said, holding her grandson in her arms. "Now you can live everything you missed with Marcus," Jennifer said generously. "It's not about making up for the past," Elizabeth replied. "It's about living the present to the fullest." Elizabeth became a very dedicated grandmother. She spent every day at Marcus and Jennifer's house, helping with the baby and enjoying every moment with her grandson. "Elizabeth, you're spoiling my son," Marcus joked when he saw Elizabeth indulging the baby's every whim. "It's a grandmother's right to spoil her grandchild," she replied. "Let me make up for 40 years of wanting to spoil a child in the family." Robert and Margaret were also radiant about their great-grandson. It was moving to see 4 generations of the same family gathered: Robert and Margaret, Elizabeth, Marcus, and little Robert. "This child will grow up knowing he is very loved," Elizabeth said. "He will have great-grandparents, grandparents, and parents. There will be the complete family I dreamed of giving to Marcus." During the first years of her grandson's life, Elizabeth devoted herself entirely to helping raise him. It was as if she were reliving the motherhood she had lost with Marcus. "Sometimes I get the impression you love Robert more than me," Marcus would joke. "I love differently," Elizabeth would explain. "I love you with the longing of 40 years. I love Robert with the certainty of the present." Little Robert grew up in a very close-knit and loving family. From a young age, he heard the stories about how Daddy had found Grandma Elizabeth after being lost from each other for so long. "Was Grandma Elizabeth hiding?" he would ask. "She was, but Daddy was very clever and managed to find her," Marcus would explain. "And now, she won't hide anymore. Never again. Now she stays here with us forever." When Robert turned 5, Elizabeth organized a special party for him. She invited the entire extended family: Carol, Patricia, Dorothy, who came from Myrtle Beach especially for the party, and several friends they had met during the lecture years. "This party is to celebrate not just Robert's birthday," Elizabeth announced during the party. "It's to celebrate the family we managed to build after so many years apart." Marcus watched the scene with deep emotion. His life had changed completely since that stormy afternoon in the cave. What began as a search for shelter had transformed into a journey of discovery, reconciliation, and family building. "Elizabeth," he said, approaching her during the party. "Thank you." "For what?" "For making the most difficult decision of your life 40 years ago. For protecting me. For waiting until I was mature enough to find you and understand." Elizabeth smiled and hugged her son. "Marcus, you don't need to thank me for being your mother. Being your mother has always been the greatest privilege of my life, even when we were apart." During the party, little Robert approached Elizabeth with an innocent question. "Grandma Elizabeth, why did you take so long to come live near us?" Elizabeth knelt to the child's height and answered affectionately, "Grandma was waiting for your daddy to grow up and get really strong so he could come get me." "And now you'll stay forever?" "Forever," Elizabeth promised. "Now our family is complete." Years passed and the family continued to grow. Marcus and Jennifer had another child, a girl who was named Elizabeth in honor of her grandmother. "Now I have 2 grandchildren with special names," Elizabeth said when the girl was born. "One with the name of the grandfather who welcomed me into the family, another with my own name." Elizabeth was nearly 70, but she remained active and present in her grandchildren's lives. She took them to school, played with them, told stories of her youth. "Grandma Elizabeth has the best stories," little Robert used to say. "That's because Grandma Elizabeth lived many adventures before coming to live here," Elizabeth would explain. Marcus had become a respected teacher in the city. His history classes were famous for the way he connected historical events with personal and family experiences. "History isn't just about kings and battles," he would tell his students. "It's about ordinary people who made extraordinary decisions." Often he used his own family history as an example in class. Imagine a young mother 40 years ago, at a time when there were no laws to protect women from domestic violence. How do you think she would feel? What options would she have? The students engaged deeply in these discussions, understanding that history was alive and present in their own families. Elizabeth also occasionally participated in Marcus's classes, sharing her perspective on the historical events she had witnessed. "When I was young, there were no cell phones, internet, none of that," she would tell the fascinated students. "People communicated through letters that took days to arrive." "And how did you manage to meet up?" the students would ask. "We depended more on each other. Families were closer because they needed to be." These visits by Elizabeth to the classes became very popular. The students loved hearing the real-life stories she told. One day, one of Marcus's students asked a question that deeply marked him. "Professor, aren't you sad for having lost so much time away from your mother?" Marcus thought carefully before answering. "I'm not sad because I learned that we don't lose time when that time was necessary to prepare us for something greater. I needed those 40 years to become the son my mother deserved to have." Elizabeth was present in class that day and was moved by her son's answer. After class, she sought him out. "Marcus, you said something very beautiful today, about not having lost time." "It's true, Elizabeth. If we had found each other earlier, perhaps I wouldn't have been mature enough to understand your sacrifice. Maybe I would have been bitter or resentful. And perhaps I wouldn't have been ready to be the mother you needed. I needed those 40 years to heal from the traumas of the past. So we found each other at the right time. Exactly at the right time." As the years passed, Elizabeth gradually lost some physical abilities, but kept her mind lucid and her spirit strong. Marcus made sure she had all the necessary support to maintain her independence as much as possible. "I don't want to be a burden to you," Elizabeth would say when Marcus insisted on helping her. "Elizabeth, you will never be a burden. Taking care of you is an honor. But you have your family, your work, and you are part of my family, the most important part of my story." When Elizabeth turned 75, the family organized a special party. People came from various towns, friends they had made during the years of talks, relatives she had reconnected with. "This party is to celebrate not just my 75 years, Elizabeth said in her speech. "It's to celebrate a life that was saved by love. When I was young, I thought my life was over, but I discovered that sometimes life starts over when we least expect it." During the party, Marcus had a special surprise for Elizabeth. He had invited Helen, the daughter of the midwife who helped at her birth. Elizabeth, I want to introduce a very special person. Helen is the daughter of Mrs. Dorothy, the midwife who helped me be born. Elizabeth was emotional upon meeting Helen. Your mother was an angel in my life. Without her, I would never have managed to give birth to Marcus safely. My mother always remembered that night, Helen shared. She said she had never seen such a courageous mother. The meeting with Helen allowed Elizabeth to learn more details about the night of Marcus's birth, closing another piece of the puzzle of her story. Now I have the complete story, Elizabeth said to Marcus after the party. From the moment of your birth until today, no piece is missing anymore. In the following years, Elizabeth dedicated herself to writing her complete memoirs. She wanted to leave a record for her grandchildren and future generations of what her life journey had been like. I want my great-grandchildren to know that their great-grandmother was a woman who didn't give up, she would say while writing, who faced difficulties but always kept hope. Elizabeth's memoir became a perfect complement to the book Marcus had written years before. Together, the two books told the complete story of the family from two different perspectives. It's interesting how the same story can be told in different ways, Elizabeth observed. You wrote from the point of view of the one who was searching. I wrote from the perspective of someone waiting to be found. Elizabeth's memoirs became very popular among elderly women who had gone through similar situations. She began receiving letters from readers who identified with her story. Your story gave me the courage to talk about my past with my children, wrote one reader. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to start over, wrote another. Elizabeth was deeply moved by these letters. I never imagined my story could help so many people, she would say. It's because your story is about courage, love, and forgiveness, Marcus explained. These are universal themes that touch everyone. During one of the last years of her life, Elizabeth developed a special project. She wanted to create a foundation to help women who were victims of domestic violence rebuild their lives. I want to use my story to do something practical, she explained. I want to help other women find the courage I found. The Elizabeth Thompson Mitchell Foundation was established with the money from the family's 2 book royalties. The foundation offered psychological, legal, and financial support for women trying to escape abusive relationships. This is the most beautiful way to honor your story, Marcus said on the day of the foundation's inauguration. It's the way to give meaning to all the suffering I went through, Elizabeth replied. If my pain can prevent the pain of other women, then it was worth it. The foundation became a family project. Marcus helped with the administrative part, Jennifer coordinated the psychological services, and even little Robert participated in the fundraising campaigns. Grandma Elizabeth saves the sad mummies, he would explain to his school friends. Exactly, Elizabeth would say. Grandma helps the sad mummies become happy again. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this moving story. It was a 40-year journey that showed us how true love overcomes time and distance. Elizabeth taught us that sometimes to love means to let go, and Marcus showed us that it's never too late to find our family. Leave your comment with sincere words about what touched you most in this story. And don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.